Amen. Well, we've been privileged to be able to have Tony, Melinda, and Alyssa Whitehead with us. Just a short little while, but we've grown so accustomed to them. And then he comes and tells me that they're going to leave, and I'm like, what? Why does this have to happen? But the Lord has called them, and that we don't want to stand in the way of that at all. We're always selfish, right? We want to keep a hold of everybody that we can. But we also play a part in the responsibility of the church that mentors, trains, and sends people along the way. And so they feel the call of God to go to Korea, and things are working out to go there. And they've got to earn some money or gather some money, raise some support a little bit to get there. And so I just asked them I think we're the first church to present at, aren't we, today? So what a privilege for us. And he's been helping playing his guitar and helping Pastor Melissa lead the teens on Wednesday night. And we're so privileged to be able to have them a part of our church for these last little, couple of months or whatever it's been. And we're so thankful. But I've asked him to come and share with us today. And when he's finished, then we will come back for a love offering to help them in their expenses as they go to Korea. But we want him to share the word of the Lord and their call to go to Korea. So Pastor Tony, come up and share with us, please.
I'm nervous I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share, and I'm going to be a little shameless for if you don't mind. I'll give your permission to do that. All right, first I want to shamelessly plug a little bit Melissa was talking about with Max. As a youth pastor for the last 10 years, I can't help but say something about it, and I hope that every teen in here hears this. Max is an amazing opportunity. The reason the schools put these together, these events at MNU and Trevecca and all of our Nazarene colleges, is because they want you to have an opportunity to share your talents and your giftings that God has given you for the sake of His kingdom. And we do that through sports and art and music and everything that you do there. And it's just an amazing opportunity. So I just wanted to shamelessly plug that and say, give it a lot of prayer and a lot of thought and jump in on that because it's an amazing opportunity. And the second thing is, we're going to South Korea, so it's pretty obvious that we have a heart for missions. And so I want to help your missionary president out. And I want to plug a book. I read this book when it came out. The title of this book is For Whose Sake I Have Lost All Things.
Wonderful book.
Absolutely. This was my favorite out of all the ones that came out this year. And the reason being, who loves a good, entertaining love story with action and movement and change and challenge and all those amazing things? This book has that. This book is a love story about how God worked in the lives of two people, brought them together from opposite sides of the world, and worked in their lives to change them into a totally different direction than they ever expected they could go. And I think the reason this story spoke to me so much is because it is our story. It's what God did in our lives. And I just wanted to plug that. If you get a chance, read this book. It's awesome. It is an amazing book. Just wanted to help you out there. This is the first time that we've had the opportunity to share in this way. I've been a youth pastor for, 10 years roughly. Been in the Church of the Nazarene for a little longer than that. Worked with children and youth, pastored a church for a little bit. So I've done quite a few different things throughout my journey with God. But my journey with God really started in 2003. It didn't start, I wouldn't say it before then, because I hadn't given myself to it. And so what I want to share with you guys today, and I tried to structure this sermon, so to speak, to where I could share my story in the midst of it. And I say my story, I mean our story, because it really is our story. first Sunday that we came and visited, because Melissa had been asking us for a while to come visit, and we came, and I'm sorry I tend to pace a little bit. Just wanted to throw it out there. The first Sunday we came, I had to laugh, and I told Melissa this later because I kind of had to giggle about something, because several years ago, a pastor friend of mine had a conversation about the tendency for the very front row of pews to be empty. And so I had to giggle because, like most churches, you come in and the front row of pews is empty, like it is today, right? Thank you. So with the exception of the pastors, we know pastors tend to sit on the front. So, pastors are pastors. Sorry. But it got me to thinking about buffer zones. Have you ever thought about buffer zones? Have you ever noticed that? We come to church and we go to events like church services, and we tend to create these buffer zones. We'll sit really close to our family and our close friends, but not to that person we don't know very well. Have you noticed that? We sit down in a row of chairs. We always leave, of course, the front row open because we need that buffer zone between us and the pastor because we don't want to be challenged too much. Right? Sometimes we might be worried about getting spit on and stuff. I've served with some pastors. So it can be a safe thing. But when we sit down in the chairs, we scoot in and we'll leave a chair or two between us and that person we don't know real well, right? That buffer zone. We need a little bit of comfort there. So we leave that buffer zone. It's kind of an odd thing, though, when we go to a concert, we don't do that, right? We go to a concert, we get on, I've even got a kick out of Christian concerts, because people sit, all the adults sit in the front row, and as close as they can get in the seats. The concert starts, and all the teens run to the front and try to get on the stage with the performer. So in concerts, we ignore it. But in other situations, we keep a hold of it. So I thought those were, and there's other areas, right, that we have buffer zones. You know, we go to the store, we tend not to stand too close to the person in front of us in line. We give people room when we're walking down the aisle, so we just don't want to get too close to them. Guys, when we go to the restroom, we leave that space. Probably should have gone. Sometimes it's a safety thing, though, right? Sometimes we like to have that little bit of distance. That's safer. But have you ever thought about buffer zones being an issue? Have you ever thought about the fact that these buffer zones, these comfort zones, this safety net that we lay out there around us can actually prevent us from experiencing God and what He might be trying to do in our lives? So that's the thought that I kept thinking about over the last, how many weeks has it been? A couple of months, I think. That I've been kind of stewing on this and thinking, you know, there's a message here. And I've been praying, I've been asking God to kind of put this together for me. And He kind of made this come together for me over the last couple of weeks as we've been trying to figure out how we were going to share what it is that we're going to do and what God's calling us to do next in our lives, and be able to bring a message that's relevant to the church here as well. And I got to thinking about the Apostle Peter, not Paul, sorry. Paul's too easy to go to, he wrote too much of the Bible. The Apostle Peter, though. And we think about Peter, and I kind of think about Peter because Peter is a lot like me when I look at his story and the whole thing that happened with him. See, Peter knew who he was before Christ, right? He was a fisherman. His family were fishermen. That's what he was. And then Jesus come along and Jesus said, hey, come with me. And he said, okay. And so he went with Jesus. And see, he knew who Jesus was, right? He knew that Jesus was the Messiah. When Jesus asked him, Peter said, you are the Son of God. You are the Messiah. Well, then what happened? Jesus died on the cross. Peter's world, what he thought was true, got all messed up. And where did we find Peter at? Right back where he started. He went back to his comfort zone. He went back to what he knew he was supposed to be, and that was fishing. He looked at the other disciples and said, I don't know what else to do, so let's go fishing. Y'all come along, go on, I'll go fishing. See, as we create these buffer zones, we create them out of who we know we are, right? And that's kind of how my story was. I did that. I had the same way. In growing up, I didn't go to church. As a teenager, I didn't go to church. And even before that, my church experience was my Southern Baptist aunt, who was one of those fire and brimstone aunts. If you didn't go to her church, you were dead, basically. She would go into my grandmother's house because my grandmother was Roman Catholic and she was convinced that my grandmother was going to hell. So she would go into my grandmother's house and she would put tracts in between the books on the bookshelf. So if my grandma tried to pull a book off, suddenly she was hearing about God. That's what I grew up with. And then in middle school and high school, I got invited to a couple of churches, you know. Most of the time I went because the pretty girl invited me. That's a good reason, right, guys? Come on, somebody get with me. It's not really. My experience, though, was that of, I went for the wrong reasons. And then when I got there, a lot of times I experienced things that I shouldn't have experienced, that you wouldn't expect to experience in church. In high school, I had long hair. At one point, I got my hair pierced because that was the thing you did. Now it's both ears or something. It's not weird to me. But anyway, I went to these Baptist churches and these Methodist churches with these friends of mine that invited me. And the Methodist church never tried to run me out, but this one particular Baptist church that several of my friends went to, that I actually participated in a basketball league with, the first time I went there, I didn't take my earring off. And I was told, I'm going to pick on the old ladies. Okay, sorry. I'm going to apologize. This little old lady actually came up to me and told me, you got long hair and an earring, you're going to hell, you need to get out of here. You don't belong, that's not how we dress in this church. That was my experience. So for me, I knew how I was. I knew I was going to be a good guy. I knew I was going to be successful. I knew one day I was going to get married and I was going to have kids and I was going to be an Air Force fighter pilot. And when I retired from the military, I was going to own a ranch in Colorado and I was going to have horses and cattle and the whole nine yards. I had this whole plan.
What happened?
That's what I'm saying.
Put on hold for right now.
That could be it. I'm still hoping one day God will still let me have that ranch. But so far, it's got me going in a direction. We ended up, after we got married and had kids, we ended up in Dallas, Fort Worth area, and we were living pretty good. We really loved Dallas. It was a great place. Growing up in Texas was an amazing place to grow up. But we lived there, and we were doing well. And we were living comfortable, and we had everything you could need and more. And we were living the good life. We had good money. I was making good money. My wife was making okay money. We had the cars. I had a motorcycle. We went out and played with our friends and everything every weekend. We had a life. We thought it was pretty good. Until one day it all crashed. And we found ourselves on the verge of losing everything we had. And we were looking at this. I know me personally, and I hadn't talked to my wife a whole lot about this, so I don't know what all was going through her mind at the time. I'm pretty sure it was probably similar to mine. But I'm looking around and I'm going, okay, what happened? This is what the world said I was supposed to do, and this is what I did, and I've always tried to be really good and do the right thing and work hard and pay my bills, and what happened? And we sat down and we said, we don't know what's going to happen. The house is 3 months behind, so we know that something's going to happen there. And so we came up with this plan. We were going to go back home to Lubbock, and we were going to visit family, and we were just going to kind of look for jobs over there. And we were going to take it as a sign we needed to be there if one of us found a job when we got there. And I was going to put the house on the market if we needed to, so we could get it sold and hopefully not get it repoed. And that didn't work, by the way. We ended up losing everything. But we get to Lubbock, and it was really this really crazy thing. I had been unemployed already for about 4 going on 5 months at the time. And we get there with this plan. If one of us finds a job, and I'm thinking we're going to have to look, because I've been looking for several months. And for some reason in Dallas, Texas, there were no jobs. It was weird. I mean, how do you have a city that big and not be able to find a job of some kind? I couldn't even get on at McDonald's. That's how bad it was. But we get there, and the very first day we're there, my wife goes out, puts in one job application, and gets hired that day. So I'm going, I guess we're moving to Lubbock, Texas. So we end up back in Lubbock. And it took me another, I believe, 3 months to finally find a job after that. So I finally landed a job. In the meantime, we have gone completely bankrupt. I am completely lost. I'm still not trying to find God. I'm still dead set on, I accepted Jesus. He died on the cross. My sins are good. I don't need anything beyond that. And when I was a little kid. And so I'm still not looking. And I think I was actually a little mad at God because of what we had experienced. Well, my wife's mom invited her to go to a 4th of July party that one of the Nazarene churches around the corner from where we were living was throwing. And I said, y'all go, have fun. I'm not going. I want nothing to do with church, no. She came home excited. The kids were excited. The people loved them. The people just poured God's love into them. And for 4 days straight, my wife bugged me about going to church on Sunday. Now, mind you, I still didn't want to go. So finally, with the mindset of, I'm going to say yes so you will shut up and leave me alone, I conceded to go. Well, we stepped foot into this little Nazarene church. I think they had about 45, 50 members at the time. And these people just grabbed a hold of us from the moment we stepped in the door to the moment we left. And they called us every day to see how we were doing. And they checked on us every week to see how we were doing. And if we didn't make it to church, they reached out to us to find out where we were. And something happened in that mix that changed my heart and made me finally say, okay, I guess I'm going to church. And we started going regularly. And about 3 months into it, one day, I don't know why, I can't even tell you what the pastor was preaching on. I think it had absolutely nothing to do with salvation. In fact, I remember something about a story about his grandma on a switch or something. But anyway, I found myself at the altar. I didn't know why. I just knew I needed to be there. And the pastor knelt down and he said, what can I pray with you? What do you need? And I said, I don't have a clue. I just know some reason I'm supposed to be right here. And so he said a short prayer, and I stayed there a little while longer, but it wasn't very long after that till I realized what was going on. See, I needed to let go and step out of that comfort zone and let God start moving in my life. And I am convinced in this passage that I want us to look at today that that's what was going on with Peter. You know, he had experienced being with Jesus, and he experienced losing Jesus, and we found him back in his comfort zone, and then he experienced seeing Jesus resurrected. And through that 40 days of experiencing Jesus on and off, we found him in the upper room at Pentecost. And the Spirit was poured out on him, and he was changed. And we know that he began to preach everywhere he went. But see, his comfort zone had just shifted a little bit, right? Now, instead of knowing he was a fisherman and he was following Jesus, now he was a Jewish Christian preaching Jesus. Amen? And that's where we find him in this passage. And I think that God needed to move him just a little bit farther. If you'll look at Acts chapter 10, verses 9 through 16. This is a familiar passage for most of us. This is where Peter is finding some rest. And it says, starting in chapter 9, about noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. And he became hungry and wanted something to eat. And while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened up and something like a large sheet being let down to the earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened to him 3 times, and immediately the sheep was taken back to heaven. This vision, I think, holds something key for us that really fit in when I got to thinking about it with our story. See, I had committed to going to church, and I had allowed my buffer zone to be re-shifted to being a church person, to going to church and being labeled Christian, and allowing myself to serve in the church with that group of people I became comfortable with. I think Peter, at this point in his story, kind of the same thing is going on. He's recognizing himself as a follower of Jesus, but he's still a Jew. And so he still wants to be a good Jew and follow all the Jewish practices. And so at this point, while they're traveling, he finds himself on the road, still trying to figure out what God wants him to do. And so he goes up to pray, and he gets ready, and he goes, "I'm kind of hungry. Well, maybe while I'm praying, they can get some food ready. When I get done, I'll be able to eat." And so he asks them to go ahead and prepare the meal, and then he sees this vision as he's praying. This vision. As I read through several commentaries, I found something interesting. Some commentators say that the vision represented, the 4 corners of the earth and the need for all-encompassing, and the others say that it was just simply God telling Peter, "Get out of your comfort zone and go preach to the Gentiles." Because we know just prior to this, he had already spoken to Cornelius and told Cornelius to send men to find Peter. And we know right after this passage is where Peter talks to the men that came to find him. But I think something different is happening here. I think that God is trying to help Peter let go of that comfort zone. Let go so he can do something new in his life. To move him in a new direction. And I think it's funny how God works sometimes. I am convinced he has a sense of humor. Because it seems like every time he wants to move us, it's not someplace comfortable. It's someplace that's going to stretch us and pull us in a new direction. And I don't think it was easy for Peter to go, "Okay, I'll go to the Gentiles." I think if God had said, "Peter, I already got Paul set up to go do this, but I'm going to send you to the Gentiles as well." I just don't see Peter going, "Okay, God." Because several other times in Scripture we already found Peter even confronting Jesus on what Jesus said. I mean, Jesus said, "Hey, the Son of Man's got to die. I'm going to be killed on the cross. It's going to be horrible." And Peter jumped out, "Hey, what are you talking about?" "No!" And Jesus had to call him down for that. So I just don't see Peter rolling over and going, "Okay." But I do see God working. Because he sees this vision where it's not just the clean animals on this sheet, the stuff that's acceptable for a Jew to go eat and be involved with. It's all these things, clean and unclean. And God is telling Peter, "Look, this has already happened in Christ, and I've made it all clean. It's all good now. You need to stop staying in this comfortable buffered zone and get out of it so we can do something new." And I know that's what he had to do with us. And I know Peter finally caught it, because if you look down at verse 28, the men have come and they've told Peter they're looking for him. And he says, "Okay, stay the night. We're going to give you a meal. We'll go in the morning." And he gets to Cornelius' house, and he comes into Cornelius' house, and the first thing he says is this: "You are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate with or visit a Gentile. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. Peter got it. Somehow, in the process of seeing this vision and being confronted by these Gentiles needing him to come to their house, he got it. Because not only did he invite them into this Jewish house that he was staying in, but he then went to their house, which would have been absolutely unheard of in that time. And see, that's what I saw in us. Because I know for me, that's one thing I had to change. I never saw myself as a preacher. I never saw myself as a missionary. I never saw myself as doing anything that God would want me to do other than coming to church, singing some songs, and listening to Pastor Nathan preach. Or any pastor. But along the way, God changed me.
Amen.
And see, it went from that point at the altar to, again, I was unemployed. It's kind of weird how that's always happened. God keeps talking to me when I'm unemployed. I don't know what's up with that. Tell me sometime. I'd love to know the answer to that. He knows me better than I know myself. And I was sitting at home, and this was another period where I think I was on about my 3rd month of unemployment and getting to the end of what the government will allow me to be paid. And I wondered, God, what is going on? You know, you called me to the altar. I committed to do what you wanted me to do. I've been trying to serve everything I can serve in the church. I've been doing everything I feel like you've been telling me to do. What's going on? How many of y'all like TBN? That works. I don't either. But for some reason, I was sitting there that day. My wife was at work, and I'm sitting there, and I'm flipping through channels, and I stopped on TBN. And Pat Robertson was on there going through some of his stuff, and they started up a segment of the program where they were talking about their Waters for Life missions program. The work that they do overseas in places like Africa and Saudi Arabia and stuff, where they're going in and trying to give water, build water wells so these people don't have to walk miles on end every day to get fresh water, that they'll have water right there in their village. And I'm listening to this, and I'm just kind of zoned out because I really wasn't that interested in it anyway. But, you know, I always wondered, people would say, I heard an audible voice, I heard God say. I always wondered, how does that happen? How does God talk to us? What do you mean you heard him say? I never understood it till that day. But I was sitting there watching this, and clear as a bell, I heard God say, you are going to be a missionary. I went, oh, no. Oh, God, no. You know where I came from. You know the things I've done. You know the lifestyle I live. You know the stuff I am not a missionary. I'm not a preacher. I can't teach people. I can't preach. I can't. No, that's not me. For 3 weeks, I argued with God day and night. I never said a word to my wife. I never said a word to my pastor. I never said a word to any of my friends or relatives. I argued with God every day that he had the wrong guy. So I didn't want to get out of that comfort zone. But he forced me to. 3 weeks to the day later, he forced me to. Guys, tell me if this is not the scariest thing in the world. Your wife walks in from work. She opens the door, and the first words out of her mouth are not, hi, honey, how was your day? Hello, I'm home, anything like that, right? The first words out of her mouth is, we need to talk. I immediately went into, okay, what did I do? I took the trash out, I did the dish, what did I miss? Oh no. I'm thinking I'm in trouble, right? She said, I've been wrestling with something for 3 weeks. I said, what? She said, God told me that we're supposed to be missionaries. I said, what? She said, God told me we're supposed to be missionaries. I said, when did this happen? 3 weeks ago today. So, okay, God, I'm done. I'm not arguing. I'm done. You got it. So I went to my pastor. And I said, Pastor, I don't know what to do with this. I've been serving in the church, and God has told me I need to be a missionary, and I have no idea what to do, what to go, where to go, and nothing. I don't know what I do. And he said, I don't know. Talk about a scary thing when your pastor says, I don't know. So he suggested I call the global office. So I called the global office, talked to Sandy Cunningham. She gave me a whole list of things we needed to do to prepare. So for the last 10 years plus, we have been preparing to that end. I got into school at Nazarene Bible College, started in the course of studies, graduated from there in 2013, ordained in 2013. And we've been just following where God led us from that point. We ended up moving from the church we were originally at to First Church in Lubbock. Was there for a year, talking about waiting on God. I was there for a year going, okay, God, what now? What now? I was serving there. We had a youth ministry that had grown from 3 kids to 17 in a matter of 6 months. We had success going on, and then we were asked to leave. We were moved out of that position. And so I'm sitting there going, okay, God, what's next? What do I do? I don't understand what's going on again. And I get a call from this random pastor in Biloxi, Mississippi, who invites me to consider coming to Biloxi, Mississippi to be a youth pastor. Now this is 1,200 miles that I have to move, my family and myself, with no possibility of a job at first. Knew it had to be bivocational because the church couldn't afford to pay us much. So we were going to get a little stipend from it. But we decided, okay, God, if this is what you want, open the door. So I called just randomly. I thought, okay, I'm going to call my boss. I was working part-time for Scotts Miracle-Gro as a seasonal merchandiser with them, which in Lubbock, Texas amounts to about 4 months worth of work between spring and summer hot. Because it's just hot. And so he says, well, I'm not real sure. Let me check. And he calls me back, and this was a testimony to him. He calls me back 30 minutes later, excited. He says, you've been praying, haven't you? And I said, well, yeah, we've been praying for a while about this. We're trying to figure out what God wants us. He goes, I can tell you've been praying. He said, in my 15-year history of working with Scotts Miracle-Gro, this has never once happened. I said, okay, what are you so excited about? He said, I made a phone call. He said, and they need somebody today down there. So your job can transfer. I've never seen this happen before. So my job transferred. So now I have some more extra income. So we decided to move to Biloxi, Mississippi for this little stipend. I think I was getting $700 a month from the church. And then I was working, and then some other jobs fell into place when we got there. But we stepped out in faith. Most people wouldn't do that. Because that step in faith meant letting go of everything that we had and moving into something new. And then from there, of course, we ended up here. And that was another point where we had been moved by God. And we were still going, okay, God, what's next? But this time, see, there was comfort in it, because this time we knew, okay, God has already done all these things in the past, and He's going to do something now. And so we allowed Him to move us here, and we just kind of floundered around in churches, and we've been, Melissa's been frustrated with us because we've been bouncing between First Church and here. But it's been fun. And we've been letting God lead us and guide us and show us where we were going and what He had for us. And I went to the M15 conference, and of course, I hover around the mission stuff. I just gravitate to it. And so I'm hanging out with the missions people, and I'm talking to them about different things. And we got to look at it, and we saw, we got to meet with the regional mission area guy in the Ukraine area and the Eurasia area, and we talked to him a bit. And then we saw this opportunity that we're going to share with y'all today. And so we just thought, okay, see what happens. So we called the missions office and said, hey, we would like to just kind of explore what God may or may not be doing with this. And he has moved forward, so we're kind of excited. But my point with this message part of this is that God does amazing things when we just decide to let go of ourselves and step out of that comfort zone and let Him start moving. Amen?
Amen.
Let Him start doing something in our lives. And so with that, that's what we have done at this point. We've decided to, again, step out of our comfort zone and follow this call. And so as Pastor Nathan said, if you'll jump to that next, that should be the second slide on there. We've been called to South Korea, which has a total population somewhere around 50 million people. Interesting, I'm going to give you a couple quick interesting facts. 83% of Korea is urban population. It's not rural. They have a very, very small rural population. The majority of it is cities, and it's because it's a mountainous terrain, so they ended up building cities in these small blocks where they could fit them in the valleys. Okay, religious breakdown. We've got 31% Christians, and those are broke up primarily between Protestant and Roman Catholic. 24% Buddhist, and 43% they claim no affiliation at all. So if you do the math, 43% of 50 million people is a lot of people that need to be reached for God. They need to have the opportunity to make a choice. And they can't make that choice if somebody doesn't present it to them. If somebody doesn't share God with them. And before I go on with some more information that I have, I want to give my wife and my daughter, I've asked them if they would be willing. You know, my daughter is a little nervous, but she said dug up some fun facts about Korea last night. So do you want to share them? I thought she might get nervous, so I'll share them with you. Just some interesting facts that she found, and I want y'all to know that she's the one that dug these up. One confirmation we had in this call was that Alessa came to us before I ever even knew this position was available and said, I really want to go to Korea. And my first thought was, who's the Korean boy you're interested in? It's got you interested, Korea. Anyway, here's 10 quick fun facts that she dug up. Number one, taxis in South Korea are color-coded. You've got gray or white taxis that are your basic transportation. Now here's an interesting thing about these. The black taxis are your more luxurious taxis. Now here's an interesting fact you need to understand about these taxis. The black taxis have the more experienced drivers. The white and gray taxis don't. So imagine this, parents. Think about the teenager that you know that just barely got their permit or driver's license. You call a taxi and you jump in and that's the person sitting there and driving. Now add to that the fact that South Korea technology allows them to have TVs, broadcast TVs, in their car. So not only do you have this teenage driver, but you've also got to watch the TV while they're driving. It's a great thought, isn't it? When you go to the restaurants, number 2 fact, tipping is not encouraged. In fact, it is considered an insult to some if you try to tip them. Because their job is to take care of you in that restaurant and serve you. So they don't want to be tipped. Number 3, this is kind of, a couple of these are kind of weird. Number 3, the number 4 is considered extremely unlucky. I think it's something along the lines of number 13 over here. It's just spooky. Number 4, the buildings, the traditional architecture of the buildings, the curved roofs look like a smile. So it's a happy building. Number 5, this one's really interesting to get your mind wrapped around. Every baby when they're born is born 1 year old in South Korea. They're considered 1 year old there already when they're born. There's no, oh, they're 6 months old, they're 8 months old, they're 6 months old. No, they're 1 year old when they're born. Number 6, on New Year's, this one's kind of an interesting one that I got to take out of. On New Year's, everyone hides their shoes. They hide their shoes because they're worried that on New Year's night the ghosts are going to come visit their house and try on their shoes, and if they fit, they're going to steal their shoes. This one's the one Alessa kind of gravitated to, number 7. Bullfighting in South Korea does not use matadors. operates kind of like dogfighting or cockfighting in the States or in Mexico. They put two bulls against each other. Another crazy superstition, I think this may be the last one. Superstitious about red ink. Their superstition is if you write somebody's name in red ink, that means something bad is going to happen to that person. So they don't use red ink over there. I'm going to take, since my wife is a school teacher, I'm going to let her talk a little bit about the schools over there.
Okay.
Thank you.
If you
Switch.
can figure out how to turn it on.
She's a school teacher.
There you go.
I'm not quite yet a school teacher. I'm a teacher's aide right now. I'm about 3 semesters away. So from having my degree, I'm really excited about that. In Korea, their school system is top-notch. They're ranked number 2 as far as the world. They used to be third world country about 50 years ago, but now because their focus has been drawn more towards education, they're ranked number 2. I'm really excited about that. I think that's a great fact. Also, students, their typical school day, they start at about 7 a.m. and they don't go home till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. How would you kids love that? Go to school and be done at 9 or 10. By the time to go to bed, their schools are called Hagwons. I can't say it right, it comes out of Texas. But they're called Hagwons, and they go from Hagwon to Hagwon. They might finish their regular school at 2 or 3, then they're going to go do Taekwondo, or they're going to go learn piano, or just different things because they're so focused on education. English as a second language is taught in every school. It's really important. They speak Korean there, but they feel like they need to be able to speak English so that they can do world trade. Also, another fact is, let's see, is he going to put it up there? Put it up there for me. I don't have it here. Oh, the focus is not without costs. Okay, BBC News article in 2008 said the most common form of death for under 40 in South Korea is suicide. This is tragic, yes. And the government understands the pressure, and in 2008, a curfew of 10 p.m. was imposed on the Hagwons in Seoul. The education minister, I'm going to say Nam Soo-sa, I guess, said Korea has achieved miraculous growth within a short period of time. I think no other country has achieved such rapid growth within half a century as Korea. And naturally, due to that, we focused on and emphasized achievement within schools and in society so that students and adults were under a lot of stress. And that led to high suicide rates. We still have a long way to go, but we are doing some soul searching in our society. And our goals now are about to make people happier. I guess that's the last fact for me. That's her.
Trying to get her to speak more.
Yes, sorry.
It'll happen one of these days. I'm pretty positive of it. I put those facts in there because I wanted to really stress what's going on in South Korea. About 50 years ago, the government there, and many people still refer to them as a third world country, but they're really not. They've become a leader in IT and industry. In fact, LG and Samsung are housed and started in South Korea, which are major products here in the States. One thing that changed in them was they decided to start focusing on things, and they made education their primary concern. And they wanted young and old alike to be educated, and they realized that in order for this to happen well, that English as a second language could no longer be an option. It had to be a requirement. And they put so much stress on it that there are good and bad that come out of this. Okay? The bad is that it's so stressful on the people there that suicide is a common thing if they feel like they're failing. Think about it. Everything about your life and about your family's life is about how well you do in school. That's a lot of stress. So it had benefits and it had costs at the same time. Benefits are that it became an IT, technological and industrial powerhouse in the world today. Another positive thing is 93% of the students in South Korea graduate from high school on time. and continue on to higher education. That's an awesome thing. In the States, we struggle to have 70% of our students graduate. That's just to show the difference in this focus. But there's drawbacks as well. And so what we have in the church that we were called to, what we've been called to is to take part in the Daekwon Church of the Nazarene. This particular church is located in Posun, South Korea, which is just west of Gyeongsang and about 80 miles south of Seoul. Okay, just to kind of give you a reference point where it's at. What this church noticed was about 6 years ago, they noticed that they had a lot of transient workers coming into the area because of the farming and the industry going on there. So they noticed that they had African and Ukraine, Russian, China, Southeast Asia, Bangladesh workers coming in that spoke English. And then they noticed that they had a lot of Filipino women that were marrying into the Korean families there. And so they decided, we need to figure out something to reach into this community. And so about 6 years ago, they began an intentional ministry to reach into the lives of these people. And so they developed or called a person to help them develop an English-speaking ministry at the church there. Along with that, because it's very difficult to get into South Korea and a lot of other countries without something positive for a work visa. And so teaching is the easiest way. So they grabbed a hold of the focus on English as a second language. And so they created an English as a second language academy, which is what the work visas and things for this position serve on. Okay? So that they could bring people in to not only teach English as a second language, which gives a tool to reach into the lives of the children. And anybody who's worked in children and youth ministry knows that that's also a tool to reach into the lives of the parents. And so it created a doorway, and then they're doing some other things with the English-speaking ministry to try to create more doorways into people's lives. But this is what we've been called to take a part in. It's helping them to continue the work of this ministry and to continue to develop it further. What we'll actually be doing there is, because my wife hasn't gotten her teaching certificate yet, she can't get a work visa there. But she can volunteer. And she's got the teaching experience to be able to do it. So, I will be going under a work visa as an English as a second language teacher, and we're receiving the salary from the church, which is very tiny, but it's enough to kind of live on. Okay? And I will be teaching in the academy in the evenings and running the ministry in the mornings throughout the day, as well as the Sunday services. So our primary responsibility will be, of course, to the ministry of the church, but we'll also be running the academy, which allows us to reach into the lives of the kids as well. So things that they've already got in place that we'll be working to further the ministry there is Bible studies that they began in people's homes. Now, an interesting thing is a lot of these workers don't live in homes like we do today. Most of the housing there is very small apartments, and some of these people even live in converted shipping containers that the industries that they work in provide for them to live in. So it's a totally different living situation there. As well as they've got some things trying to get going with reaching out to some of the other school teachers in the area that are not involved with the church in any way. So there's a lot of different things we're going to be doing there. Now, needs. This is probably the most difficult part of any presentation, if you will, because this is where I got to ask for y'all's help. But see, I want to do it in a little bit different way. If we look at Philippians chapter 4, in verses 10 through 20, we find the Apostle Paul talking to the church of Philippi. And he stresses to the church there how important they are to his ministry. And how it's not about just the small monetary gift that they were able to give, but the fact that he knew that on a daily basis, they were praying for his needs and concerned about how his ministry was going to the people that he was going to, that they were helping him go to. And so that's what we're asking you guys to do, is to help partner with us in enabling us to enter into this ministry opportunity that God's presented to us. Some of the needs that we need, first and foremost, prayer for our family. It's not easy to pack up and move to a whole new place. So we're asking you to join with us in praying for our spiritual health and our needs in this transition time. Second thing is pray for God's provision, not only for us as we prepare to go, but for the church there as they prepare for the people that have been serving to exit and us to move in. because there's a lot of transition that has to happen. And third is the financial piece. If you feel that you can, we need help. We've got a lot of things that cost money. We've got to get work visas that require a ton of red tape paperwork that I never knew was going to be possible to even have to do. And every little piece costs money. We need help with passports. It's going to cost us about $1,000 to get passports alone. That's not including the work visas or anything. And then we've got to figure out what little bit of stuff we're going to be able to take with us so we can ship over there. The only thing the church is going to be able to help us with is our plane tickets themselves. So everything else is on us to take care of to get there, to be able to be involved with this ministry. And so that's the need we bring to you guys. And we just ask you to pray about how God would have you partner with us in this ministry. I appreciate y'all's time and allowing me to share with you. And I hope I've left at least some kind of message.